Okay, great.
Cool.
Yeah. So Daniel, what you were saying was that you were working on the category maturity for subgroups.
That's right.
And subgroups is a category on its own.
It's part of Access. It's one of
Okay.
the features or the objects we wish to test because of the rating that it has or has exists on the website. So currently it's complete, not necessarily by metric or by standing, or excuse me, testing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of assigned because it exists on the site. Let me I'm trying to look it up real quick.
Yeah, I see it here. Yeah, it's not a category on its own. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand. Um,
And I came into this by strictly by recommendation by the rest of the management managed group, I think. So Mike had
mhm.
suggested focusing on this, and
Right.
so from that I was trying to start more or less from zero and
Hmm.
try and work with my PM around this, and she came up with some ideas around jobs to be done, and so it was kind of trying to groom that and making sure that it made sense or in the direction that we wanted to try and validate.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting right off the bat that it's not a category, although um, it's in the category maturity, and we talk about features making up a broader category.
Right.
That was something I feel it's a bit inconsistent. But yeah, it's regardless. It's something that it looks like we want to test, um, no matter if it's a category or not, and we wanted to go through the CMS process.
Yeah, it says
Um,
here that it was as part of this stage, the subgroups were the ones that were rated as complete. The other ones
right.
are, I think, in process.
Yeah, so you were saying that one thing that you were having questions about in that document is how do you link the job statements to the scenarios, and uh, how does all of that go into play, basically, right?
Yeah, or should they link? That's kind of the thing is
Right.
what's the because I was looking at the instructions on the website and then
Hmm.
using the ones that you had done previously as a guide and trying to see how that worked.
Yes, yes. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, they're all linked, and basically, if we look at, so let me quickly share my screen.
Hmm.
So in this document, um, this is a job statement, right? So this job statement, there are many ways that GitLab supports this job, right?
Hmm.
And the scenarios that we need to test are the ones that support it.
Okay.
And so you might, I think, I don't know if, depending on the solutions and what we already have in place today, if you can do a one-to-one mapping, or it will be a one-to-many or many-to-one. um, in my case, when I was doing the code review category CMS, everything mapped really well to the jobs, because there were different states of mind. Although there was a little bit of overlap, like people would use or navigate or pass through certain screens or use certain buttons or features, but you could test them more or less separately. So the jobs were linking to the different scenarios that support them. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
So going back to the jobs to be done, maybe look at those. And so some of the comments that were offered by Mike or some of the other folks in Manage were make sure they're more specific. So I had
Mm.
changed. There was something where, like on number 2, it said when I want to manage a group's resources. We
Okay.
changed that to membership to be specific in regards to access or features around
Right.
access.
Yeah.
So
So.
yeah, go
Mhm.
ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that as long as so i- we should validate the jobs to be done. Like it's one of the prerequisites of doing a CMS. In the case of code review, and because it was done inside of an OKR, it was in the quarter, and there were a lot of other competing priorities. We didn't have time to validate them, but we had some confidence. So I think more or less what you have here in terms of the confidence, if it was researched or not, or if it's just a heuristic. I think that as long as you're more or less comfortable and um, everyone is in agreement about what is the scope of a job, I
Mm-hmm.
think the wording is something that could be tweaked afterwards, because it's not something um, I mean, unless you feel like it's something that can definitely influence which scenarios you do or you don't do, or how you word the scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't think that way, I think you can leave the wording, the tweaking, and the iteration itself of the jobs to be done for later. Because the way I worked with the jobs to be done was as a tool to provide the scenarios. And so even if the tool is not perfect, you can definitely have some confidence about the scenarios and what you're going to test.
Okay, so that's sort of what I was thinking, is that the testing scenarios would be based around the job to be done statement, and the scenario would then validate that statement, more or less.
Yes, so you will probably have one or more scenarios for each job, um, and um, and yeah, initially when we were working on this, because we didn't have the jobs to be done very well validated, and also the process itself um, was immature. The CMS process was itself immature. We weren't very sure about what the relationship was between the jobs to be done, the scenarios, and the features themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was working on this, one of the things that we did was, let me pull this up so other folks can see it,
Sure.
um, was stop looking at the detail level of the jobs. We were like thinking, oh, is this the right level of granularity? Is it not the right level? And there is still some work to be done on that front of defining what is the granularity level of jobs to be done. So yeah, we left the jobs to be done conversation for later, although it definitely helped us scope and understand the user types that normally perform the specific jobs. Like this job to be done one, we had two user types. For job to be done two, we had two user types, but for this job to be done three, we only had one user type. So it helped us define the user types, but the wording itself, it wasn't something that we paid a lot of attention to, although it's something that we want to do later. So we started at the other end, more looking at the features and what we consider to be the core features of the category. And these are the ones that are bolded. And the ones we felt like, oh, we really, if we could, we really wanted the participants to go through these features and screens and so on. And from those, and kind of balancing both the features that we found that are core to the category and also the jobs to be done, we started highlighting and writing down the scenarios. So for each job to be done, we uh, we noted which features we would like to cover, and then we started writing down the scenarios. Um, and one thing that is difficult to get right, and that's something that I would encourage you to work with your UX researcher, is what is the right way to phrase the scenarios, because that's something that we struggled with a lot. Was is this too vague, too concrete? Do we want to tie the scenarios more to the features themselves or leave them open? And in the end, what I would say is that, I mean, you can take a look at this document for inspiration, but what I would say is that in the end, what we consider to be the success of a scenario is the users feeling that they were successful. To give you a quick example of something that raised a lot of questions was this scenario where ideally we would like people to use the work in progress indicator when they're creating a merge request and they want to say, oh, this is not ready to be reviewed yet. So the way that people, that we phrased this was, now that you've created this merge request and asked John to review your changes, you notice that it actually needs some additional changes. How would you signal that this merge request is still being worked on and not ready to be reviewed? And there were so many different ways that people did this, and they felt that they had succeeded in the scenario. And in a certain way, we, the moderators also thought, well, yeah, they're doing what we're saying in the scenario. They're signaling that the merge request is still being worked on. And so only, to give you an idea, only 2 out of 10 people use the feature. The other 8, so the vast majority of the participants, used many different ways to signal that the merge request wasn't being worked on. Like they closed the merge request and then wrote a comment saying, oh, I'm closing this because it's not ready yet, and I'll reopen the merge request once it's ready to be reviewed. Others created a label saying still in progress or something like that. And then they stopped. When they felt that they succeeded, they stopped and they said, yeah, this is what I would do to signal that the merge request is still being worked on. And the moderators we were looking at this, we felt, we felt puzzled, like, oh, do we consider this a success or not? Because they're not using the feature that we designed and built specifically for this in GitLab. And the answer that we got from the UX research team, and what we really want to take out of the CMS process, is the users feeling that they were successful. And of course, I mean, they need to feel that they were successful, but at the same time, we need to consider if what they did would lead to a good outcome. So in this case, it led to that. So I don't know if this helps, but I would, basically what I'm trying to say is not to tie the success of the scenarios too much to the features, but just to the overall outcome of, I don't know, for example, one of the testing scenarios that you have here is, I want to build my organization in GitLab. And so, I don't know if this is the scenarios or the success paths, but if there are many different ways that people can do this and they feel that it's a success, we need to accommodate that. So even if they don't use the features, it's still a success.
Right. So that was, I guess, my confusion, is that how much do I want to do this step by step? So it sounds like in this case, probably don't have any sort of instructions, just give them the proposal or the problem statement and see if they can get to an end goal, and then gauge or measure their difficulty in achieving that goal, rather than giving them the step-by-step with key names and words.
I think it's a balance. So if you keep it too broad, which is certainly possible with something like organization in GitLab, organizing your projects and your groups and your teams and memberships. If you leave it too broad, maybe they won't understand what you're asking of them. So that's the tricky part. How can you balance being too vague or too concrete? Because if you're too concrete, like you were saying, you would give them step-by-step instructions of how to do it, which is not what you want. But you also don't want to be extremely vague, like saying, oh, the scenario is you build your organization in GitLab, right? And then you don't know what to do. Like there's so many different ways you could achieve it that they're left stuck and not knowing what to do. So there's a balance there, and that's why I said that it's really good to pair up with a UX researcher. But also one thing that really helped me was having Holly that was working on, she was also working on another CMS for issue tracking. And I had the opportunity to have her as my guinea pig, and she was going through the scenarios, and we did a dry run with a test environment, and it was great because I was seeing where certain scenarios were too vague and maybe too concrete, and she helped me with that. So that's something I would recommend is if you have the opportunity to do a dry run with someone else internally, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of what I was going to try and do once I felt that my testing scenario was more correct or appropriate for the problem that we're trying to validate.
Right.
And then, which again goes back to the job to be done statements to make sure that those were accurate, or not so much accurate, but at least written in the way that we wanted to find out or test against the problem, and make sure that the subgroup feature was a functional or valid solution or feature, versus just it's this thing that we have and nobody knows how to use it. Or I guess both situations, of response will be valid because then we know how to fix the problem if we know that there is a problem, or at least we can get to a solution if we know that there's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the jobs to be done are basically some, I think, guide rails for you to understand are we trying to write a scenario that doesn't map to a job? Maybe we need a job for that, or maybe it's a scenario that it falls out of scope. Um, and so I think I think they're there to help, but they're not the end all. So if you don't um, perfect the jobs to be done right now, I think that's okay. I think the important part is the scenarios. Those are the ones you really need to get right, and the jobs to be done are just some guidelines for you.
Okay, that's really helpful. I've kind of felt that it was the other way around, where the jobs to be done had to be perfect and nailed down. That way, they would inform the scenario. But now that you describe it, it makes more sense. Where I have a scenario that I want to validate or I want to test, and that generates or clarifies the job to be done.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think that what you said is entirely correct. It's like it clarifies the job to be done, because it's how is that job being addressed, right? And we're going down the granularity scale, and yeah, I think it's really important to validate the jobs. And looking at the table that you have here in the document, um, it gives me the impression that for these two, you have actually researched them. Is that correct?
No, this is a copy paste from the from the release management on their
Okay.
website, because I wanted to use it
All right.
as a way to look and think about the problem and how I want to visualize this, so that I have a way to put it on our website.
Yeah. So yeah, what I would do is yeah, I think what is most important is the confidence level, and in theory we should be validating the jobs, but it's a very big job, a very big sorry, not that a very big job, but a very big task to write the job statements, work with your team, and then go and validate them. There is in the handbook a page, I think Laurie wrote it up, that talks about a more lightweight way of quickly validating your jobs to be done with only internal users, internal stakeholders, which is also valid, but it still takes time. So what I would suggest is that you balance and see what is feasible in the time frame that you have, because um, if the only way for you to get confidence on your job statements is to validate them, I think you need to immediately say to your product manager and to everyone, like, we need to schedule time first to do this, and then the CMS, because I see two separate work things for you to do, and yeah, it just basically boils down to how confident you are on the jobs to be done.
That's awesome. That's really helpful.
Right.
Cool. I guess we're at our meeting time. I didn't want to hold you hostage for much longer. I
Yeah, it's
appreciate your
okay.
time.
Thank you so much for reaching
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
Daniel.
yeah. I'll probably follow up again once I'm further down the path here.
Cool. Nice to
Cool.
see you, and
Nice to see you.
see you around.
See you in the next meeting. Cheers.
Yeah. Bye.